Hi, everyone. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm coming to you from Georgiagay, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations. I'm Eve Engler. Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. Had some technical issues with some of the information I pick up during the week. I lost a whole bunch of it somehow from my phone. So I'm going to probably be a bit shorter than usual, hopefully, maybe more time for discussion and stuff. Yeah, so we've been going for about, I think, almost 150 weeks, 145 weeks or something like that. And to start off, I just there's a horrible report that the oil and gas industry is going to have its biggest year expected in 2025, 10-year high of more oil and gas drilling activity. So we are continuing on this path of more and more extraction of heavy carbon emitting tar sands. And today, apparently, the International Court of Justice began a case, I guess 2 weeks, according to this report, of hearings around island nations and the kind of country's legal responsibilities on the climate crisis to island nations that are being literally wiped off the map. And so apparently there would be some sort of advisory opinion from the ICJ, probably not for a while, I would guess, but they began the process today. There was a story in Pivot, which is sort of the ricochet in French here in Quebec about uh, title is Nino Lado Indonésienne qui se bat contre les déchets canadiens. So it's a young or teenage girl who is kind of struggling against the all the waste in Indonesia, and Canada has over the years been very ambivalent about holding back on the shipping of Canadian waste to impoverished parts of the world. And there was the big plastic summit, and I didn't see that much about it. I didn't follow it that closely, but my understanding is they didn't come up with a proper final agreement. In the Globe piece about it today, they say that Canada produces 7.1 million tons of plastic, and only 5% of that's recycled. Almost 5 million tons of plastic ended up as waste, with less than 10% recycled, according to these Globe and Mail numbers. I knew Canada was a big plastic producer, partly because when I worked at the unit, what is now Unifor, the Communications Energy Paperworkers Union, they was they represented some of the people that created the plastic, so they kind of were making arguments for continuing on as business as usual with plastic. Obviously, plastic's a horrible amount of waste, and it may be profitable, but it's incredibly damaging. And Canada is not far from a good player on that front. The Convention to Combat Tax Evasion was the UN Tax Convention, the terms of reference for a new UN Tax Convention was adopted at the General Assembly 125 to 9. Canada was one of the 9 countries to vote against this convention to combat tax evasion. I don't know much about the details of it, but apparently it's designed to lessen tax evasion and not it, it's immoral, but not surprising that the Canadian government would vote against it. They voted against previous phases of this. And as I've mentioned before, the Canadian government is basically hostile to General Assembly efforts to lessen the power of multinationals, to lessen the global imbalances of economic inequality. And I would just see this vote in that line. And of course, Canadian companies are big players in global. The mining industry is particularly odious in their tax avoidance, tax evasion schemes, and they're very good at putting the profits in low tax jurisdictions, like they set up offices in the Cayman Islands or whatever. And one of those companies that's notorious for that is Barrick Gold. Four senior employees of Barrick Gold were detained in Mali. It was reported at the start of the week, and they are in a pretty big negotiation to get more from Barrick in its operations there. And that's an interesting dynamic. We've been talking about that repeatedly. Different Canadian, other mining companies operating in Mali and some of the other Sahel countries that have kicked out French and US troops. And actually, this week, Chad also kicked out French troops. There have about 1,000 troops in Chad. And my understanding is Senegal is kind of moving down that pathway. This seems like a very positive dynamic taking place in a number of the Sahel region countries where they're moving out French military to a little bit lesser extent U.S. military, and then simultaneously demanding more from these foreign mining companies and resource companies, and Canadian companies being targeted regularly. So that's one of the, I think, positive developments taking place in the world. On the China file, it was reported that Canada joined the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, which I don't know much about. I went to the website. It's this sort of, and I read this article in the Globe. It seems like it's the US, Japan, Australia, and Canada now. And it's some sort of an arrangement to basically work with Taiwan because Taiwan is excluded from a bunch of kind of UN bodies. That's essentially what it seems to be. And Canada joining it was viewed as kind of this further step down this path of deepening ties with Taiwan as part of maybe ending or lessening the one China policy with all the sort of geopolitical ramifications that come with that. Also, and this happened. I think it was actually last week, but I read the paper, the Globe, late. Bill Blair at the Halifax Security Forum. According to Globe piece, Blair cites China's military buildup as reason to boost Canada's defense spending. So at the Halifax Security Forum, which took place, I think, about 10 days ago, he explicitly cites China as a justification for increasing Canadian military spending. That's a sort of theme. Variations of that is something we've been seeing. Top Canadian generals, the previous one, Wayne, had kind of made some variation references in that kind of direction. I don't know. I think this may be the first time that the minister from the Trudeau government has done that, and it's totally unnecessary. It's obviously, all part of this U.S. contain China policy, and there's always some new justification for increasing military spending from the standpoint of these the arms companies and the military and these other forces, and they're stating China as part of that now. And of course, it elicits a reaction, and China will propel China to spend more in the military, and it's a self-reinforcing dynamic that's being pursued. Yves-François Blanchet, who's the head of the Bloc Québécois, in the aftermath of the NATO summit, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Montreal, he complained that Canada doesn't have a plan for the 2%. There's no date. Il n'a pas de plan, il n'a pas de date. Il est incapable de déposer un plan a-t-il fait valoir. So basically complaining there's no plan, there's no date. So we really have a situation, the Bloc Québécois is criticizing the Liberals for not moving quick enough. Bill Blair was saying that in the Le Devoir on Saturday, he has an interview saying he plans to hurry up the military, the 2%. We're going to get there before before 2032, in 8 years from now. He's going to hurry it up. And actually, he's got an interesting thing in this Le Devoir article, because how he kind of throws it back on the Americans to some extent, on the speed at which Canada is increasing in military spending. What Bill Blair says is, he says that 70%, says around 70% of the arms purchases need an okay from the U.S. Congress. Okay, because I don't know if that means they're coming from U.S. companies, or in some cases, General Dynamics Canada has to get some okay from the U.S. Probably it would make sense. In some cases, General Dynamics Canada would need to get an okay because it would have technologies that are coming from the States, I guess. Yeah. So anyways, but the point being is that he's saying that our defense minister is saying you need 70% of the arms purchases, you need an okay from U.S. Congress. And he's basically saying the U.S. Congress, or I don't know if it's the Congress and the Senate, maybe it's both, I'm not sure, but U.S. okay. And he's basically putting the blame, this, like, the slowness. We want to spend more on the military, we want to build up the military, but we're in part restricted by the Americans not giving our okay quick enough. Which is, I think, an interesting PR move from the Liberal standpoint of saying, the Americans are pressuring us to increase military spending, but hey, they are, on the other side, they're restricting our ability to speed up military spending. That's an interesting kind of argument to retort. But then when you kind of think about it, like, you go bigger picture, think about it, you just go like, what in the world is going on here? The Americans are pressing us to increase military spending, but we're saying we can't increase military spending fast enough because we're buying so much equipment from the Americans, and we need an okay from the Americans. It's just like further reinforces the point that the Canadian military and Canadian military spending is a boost of the U.S. empire. Boost in that the Canadian military is basically an extension of the U.S. empire, and boost in the sense that it supports U.S. arms companies, the U.S. military industrial complex. That's, of course, a point I've made many times, but this is just a different information that kind of confirms that point. There's a story in the Maple that titled "Police Treat Nazi Monument as War Memorial in Alleged Vandalism Case." Actually did an interview with RT about this today, and it's quite an interesting story about this journalist. He's the, I guess, the head, I think, of Press Progress. There's two of them. I get them mixed up. I think it's Press Progress, or the Progress Report. Sorry, but Duncan Kinney's his name. He's in Edmonton, and the Edmonton police. Okay, so there was a defacing of a monument for the SS Waffen division, the Galicia division, where Yaroslav Hunka was part of, and stuff like that. And a monument in Edmonton was defaced, and this monument, it was Chrystia Freeland's grandfather was one of the people. The Nazi propagandist was one of the people who helped set up this monument quite a few years back. It was defaced, and the Edmonton police, they apparently initially they didn't really figure out who was responsible. Back, I think it's like 3 years ago, and they then pursue this journalist for doing it. And apparently he's a critic of the Edmonton police. He denies it, of course, and he says that basically he's being persecuted because he's been holding the Edmonton police feet to the fire, and they've done a series of other things. Anyway, so it comes out that they've been monitoring him 181 hours of like police, like cars sitting out in front of his house, following him to work, monitoring him at work. And all this is about this defacing of this monument to these former Nazi soldiers. And And what the police have done, they passed this over to the hate crimes unit. This was reported on a couple of years ago, but now they've charged him with this. There's apparently a law that gives an added punishment if you deface a Canadian cenotaph. So, it's supposed to be two monuments to the Canadian military. But in fact, this is a monument to people who fought, that, Canadian soldiers fought against. I don't think I had to see more about this law, but just on the surface of it, I don't think there should be a law that says that you get a special punishment for defacing a Canadian military monument. I think if you can have general laws about vandalism or whatever, that's fine to me. But anyway, but the idea that you're going to have this, you're going to have, and so this journalist, it's apparently go up to 10 years. He could be in jail for 10 years for apparently again, he denies it, and from little bits I've read, I don't think it seems unlikely to me that he actually did do this, and it's in fact is just a police witch hunt. But they are trying to add on this special crime of defacing a monument to soldiers that Canada fought against in World War II, who happened to have fought for Adolf Hitler. Anyways, it's an interesting story. People should definitely check out. Marcus Kolga, that Disinfo Watch McDonald Laurier guy, he posts about the protests against NATO last week, that I guess 10 days ago now, where there's some windows busted. I'll get into a bit more of that in a second here, but he posts that he claims that in one of the videos of these masked members of the anti-Israel mob in Montreal can be heard yelling "Dave," which means "let's go, hurry up" in Russian. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I was at the protest. I wasn't close to the people who busted the windows. Uh, it's possible they were Russian. I would be so wildly astounded. I almost guarantee you these were, East End Montreal Franco anarchists. The Black Bloc put out a statement taking responsibility for busting up these windows, which is actually kind of an interesting statement. It's an interesting statement in part because they sort of they do this thing about Russia and NATO, that they make sure to tell us that just because they're attacking NATO doesn't mean that they support Russia, which I thought was a little bit interesting. They phrase it decently, but anyways, Marcus Kolga, of course, it's not a surprise that he would see Russian black blockers behind busting up some windows at a NATO summit. Uh, Trudeau, on the Monday of the NATO summit, he gave a speech. And so the Tuesday Globe summarizes his speech. And I ended up listening to the whole 16 or 17 minutes speech. The big pullout from the Globe piece, which I agree with, was the highlight or the low light, is that he does this thing about how there had been the principle of might makes right in foreign policy or international relations had been long dormant. Long after, I think the wording he's long after it disappeared, Russia has brought it back. Okay, so he's saying that, and he has this thing about Russia destabilizes the rules-based international order. We can't let Russia get a piece of Ukrainian land because destabilize the rules-based order. This is our whole our way of life. Our wealth is based upon the rules-based order, and we can't let this might makes right jungle return to international affairs. And honestly, this was a ridiculous comment at any time. Obviously, look at what NATO's done in terms of wars of aggression, might makes right policy. But as Israel is just slaughtering and making it absolutely clear to anyone that it is definitively a might makes right policy, and Washington and Ottawa are happy to go along for it. As Israel is redrawing the lines on a map, there's a line that Trudeau uses in his criticism of Russia. I mean, come on, come on. And it's not just that Trudeau states this. I mean, this is what politicians lie. It's the response of Stephen Chase in the Globe and Mail, who has this, I think it's on page 3, pretty big article, well placed, top of the page. And it's Stephen Chase, who's a senior, supposed to be, this is the Globe, this isn't the National Post, this isn't the Toronto Sun, this is supposed to be serious journalism. No alternative. No alternative, not even a sentence about, okay, someone says that there's been might makes right in foreign policy, when the US invaded Iraq in 2000. I mean, there's so many innumerable examples you could take. No alternative. The only criticism is that he quotes the Republican senator or Republican congressperson who went to the NATO summit. I think I mentioned him last week or the week before, complaining that Canada is not spending more on the military or increasing its military spending more quickly. So nothing challenging the basic notion that Trudeau is putting forth, and it's just embarrassing. Stephen Chase, totally embarrassing. Now, on the note of embarrassing and far, far to the left on the spectrum, Stephen Staples, who is one of the founders of the Rideau Institute, ceasefire.ca. He's somebody who really claimed anti-war credentials for many years, prominent. He's become much less so. He sent a questionnaire to his PeaceQuest list. And so every Saturday sends an email to the list. And the title of it is 4 Ways to Shake Off Anti-Semitism Claims. Can the pro-Palestinian movement take advice from Taylor Swift? And so this is the day after the International Day of Solidarity with Palestinian people. And in this piece, it's stunning. Honestly, I wrote like 1,000-word response. I'm going to publish probably just after I get off here. I'll post to my site. But it is unbelievable how like it's erroneous. It's just stupid, sloppy mistakes that are designed to smear. Like so simple one. He says that the protesters lit the cars on fire. Well, the police have now backed away from saying they lit the cars on fire. In fact, there's pretty strong evidence that a tear gas cannon from the police lit at least one of the cars on fire, probably both of them. And he states this thing about how this woman, we talked about this last week, who does the SAG Hitler thing to the counter protest at the Concordia demo. He claims this was at the anti-NATO demo on the Friday night. So he gets something that happened the day before, claims it's at the anti-NATO protest. It's very sloppy error. He quotes this guy right at the top. He's a Facebook quote from this guy, Jim Good. So I go to this guy, Jim Good's, and it's about, like concern about anti-Semitism and Palestine movement. I go to Jim Good's Facebook page, I get the link from Stephen Staples' email to the PeaceQuest list. And the guy's just a raging anti-Palestinian bigot, right? I can scroll down a few, and he's just got this over-the-top attack, just openly racist. So he's quoting this openly racist Palestinian, and he says all these things, and he's in his email says, the pro-Palestinian movement can't seem to shake off the accusations that it harbors anti-Semitism, or it is itself anti-Semitic. And then his solution for all this, listen to this, his solution for all this is we should devote more attention to the, quote, terrible crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th. No, people don't know enough about the terrible crimes October 7th. We got to spend more time on it. And then he go on and goes, examples of this terrible anti-Semitism is that people are questioning or denying the, quote, well-documented rapes, right? So he just spews all, like, we got to just echo the Trudeau, the Israeli government's atrocity propaganda to justify their genocide. One passage he says, this is all framed as like for the movement. This is my advice to help the movement, to help it get into mainstream. And like to summarize the critique, to summarize what he's saying, there's basically 2 ways to do it. The best way to look at it, he's saying we have to focus on Jewish sensitivities to have more mainstream palatable. That would be the nice way to frame what he's doing. And the less nice way of saying we basically that he's basically just an anti-Palestinian bigot hiding, that's power-serving anti-Palestinian bigot who Stephen Staples, who is, framing it all as conservative anti-Semitism. I would lend towards the latter. And so in his email, he says, quote, the movement should be clear that it seeks a truly democratic and legitimate leadership based on the values of peace and justice, not rape and murder. Okay, he's referring to the Palestinian leadership. So he's saying his advice to the Canadians opposing the genocide in Gaza is that we should in some way determine the Palestinian leadership. I don't know, and and I don't know how we would do that exactly, and that leadership shouldn't be based on them being rapists and murderers, but rather them being for peace and justice. Now, of course, Israel's killed every Palestinian leader or thrown him in jail who doesn't go along with its expansionism. Been doing that for 70 plus years. Israel is of course responsible for so much more violence. I mean, this is the advice that someone like Stephen Staples is articulating to his list. It's 14 months into the Holocaust. It's absolutely unbelievable. Honestly, it's just stunning. The level of and I bet you Stephen Staples, while he's giving his advice to the movement, hasn't been to a friggin' demonstration over the past 14 months. Uh, just absolutely reprehensible. Anyone who donates to PeaceQuest, who knows anyone who donates, take that money out right now and send it over to CJPME, IJV, Just Peace Advocates, Canadian Foreign Policy, whoever that's actually opposing, even the NCM, the National Council of K Muslim. I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable to read something like that from somebody who claims these leftist credentials. And it's a real stain. It's a stain not just on the individual himself, Staples, but it's a stain on all of the peace, international justice movement in this country, to see that level of bigotry and hatred of Palestinians masquerading as concern about anti-Semitism. On the note of this response, and he's responding, and he's responding to this like wonderful mobilization. You can question the tactic of busting windows, but at its core, there was a student strike for Palestine, international justice student strike for Palestine, that then merges with a challenge of NATO, an anti-war, anti-militarist challenge of bringing together some issues. And that's what he's actually responding to. And he doesn't say anything about the student strike. He talks about this incident that happened on the margins of the student strike. Doesn't even mention this historic student strike. Doesn't mention this merging of international issues, and just sullies the reputation of the students, of the anti-NATO mobilization. And in the same vein, and he just echoes Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre and the police and the National Post, right? The National Post had a big full page or front page editorial: blatant criminality under the guise of protest must no longer be tolerated. Let's shut down all these Palestine demonstrations, the NATO demo. That's what they're responding to. Mark Miller, immigration minister, proposed permits for big demonstrations in Montreal in response to this. There's a whole big push about masks, making it legal to have masks at demos. I don't think anything will come out of it, because I think that when we went through this in Montreal, right? They had the current city government, city council, the Projet Montréal, which is a sort of supposedly leftish. They've done a couple okay things on bike paths and stuff like that, but mostly they've kind of very pro police and whatever. But they did get rid of the P6, which was this legislation that the police were using to mass arrest, and that comes out of the 2012 student strike and stuff like that. So anyway, I very much doubt there's going to be anything that comes of this. A little bit of a panic in the sort of media around protests in Montreal, but nonetheless, it's part of this authoritarian kind of push that the Zionists have really been pushing, that's obviously echoed from different forces. On that note, in Ottawa, I mentioned this last week. There are 2 weekends in a row. I don't actually know what happened this week. I didn't see anything about it this weekend, but 2 weekends in a row, the police changed tactics and just started basically blocking from people from taking the street. Then they arrest people. Just 2 weekends ago, they arrest 4 people, and then the next weekend they arrest 2 people. They arrest somebody, and then they arrest some people out of jail support the next day. Some of the conditions they came out. One of the persons, a prominent activist, ended up with conditions, and it's pretty intense conditions. Can't associate or communicate in any way, either directly or indirectly, by any physical, electronic, or other means, with a series of other activists. Can't attend, participate, organize, or support directly or indirectly, including but not restricted to social media, any protest in relation to the Middle East conflict. So you can't post about the Middle East conflict. Do not mask in public place, except for medical reasons. So it's these really harsh conditions that they put on this prominent activist with the Palestinian Youth Movement in Ottawa, and clearly the police are trying to ramp up this kind of push. On that note, the University of Toronto has started a consultation on anti-Israelism. So a guide to law and policy regarding anti-Semitism and Israeli discrimination. So previously, the U of T had rejected the IHRA definition when there was a big pushback. And now it looks like they're going to come up not just with a sort of IHRA-ish kind of thing, but it's actually going to have an anti-Israeli element to it. Discrimination against Israelis on top of it. David Mistrice reported that I didn't know this. The president and CEO of Torstar, Robert Pritchard, was director of the Hessig Foundation since 2006. The previous, I guess he's not currently the president, and it was taken on multiple trips to Israel by Heather Reisman of and Jerry Schwartz of the Indigo and those who finance Hessig to support Israelis and non-Israelis joining the Israeli military. On Friday, I went to the Salon du Livre de Montréal. Big thing. I've never actually been to it. I had the Baraka Books, publisher of my latest book, had a table, and I was there for a bit with this author thing, which makes me very uncomfortable, and it was very, very unsuccessful. It was almost entirely French. It was only English stand in the Palais des Congrès, very big thing. Anyways, I saw that Romeo Dallaire was going to be there. He has a book out, and when I saw the Salon du Livre, I thought it was a good chance to be there. And I've been looking for Romeo Dallaire for a long time. I've had one interaction with him back in 2019. So maybe two interactions. One other thing at Concordia. Yeah. Anyways, I've been looking to challenge, question Romeo Dallaire on video. And I feel bad, honestly, about in part what came out of this. I wanted to ask him about two things. My initial plan was to ask him a question if he thought it was a genocide in Gaza. But what I was principally focused on was to challenge his support for Paul Kagame. And ultimately, the situation didn't really allow for the question the Paul Kagame question. So I feel a bit bad about it. I feel bad for Congolese, quite honestly. Because I think he has a lot to answer. The guy in front of me is a kind of an odd dynamic of how to ask this question, but the guy in front of me sort of asks Dallaire this question about the M23, the rebels, the rebels. They're basically Rwandan proxy causing mayhem in Congo, and Dallaire's response to that, which I have a video of, is pretty stunning. He just totally justifies the M23's killing in Congo. I mean, he doesn't use those words exactly, but that's essentially what he's doing. He says that Kagame goes on the offensive. He doesn't wait to be slaughtered. He goes on the offensive, i.e., he goes and kills lots of people in the Congo and justifies it by saying, well, there was génocidaire Hutu in the Congo, whatever. longstanding Kagame argument. We know that argument. So he says that to the guy in front of me, who's this former military guy who's just like lauding, just loves Dallaire. Anyway, so I asked him about the genocide. His response surprised me. He was quite emphatic that he thinks it's a genocide, and I think that was useful to get that on record. And we even put out a press release about that this morning. It got pretty good social media circulation, but I did feel bad for not challenging him on the more fundamental issue of what he's been involved with, which is enabling Kagame's killing in the Congo. I can hopefully I'll find him again and be able to sort of go at him on that. But now I guess the kind of final thing I'll talk about is Maude Barlow, which I got going on from Stephen Staples. I talked about her 3-4 months ago, and I wrote a piece about her. Maybe it's more like 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I hadn't. She blocked me on Twitter, so I hadn't seen anything from her for a long time. So I went to her Twitter account, and I was again just taken aback. I did this back maybe in like I don't know when it was, maybe in January. Maybe it was more, yeah, 8 months ago. Maybe it's quite a while ago now. And I went through like 6 weeks of her Twitter, and I was taken aback at that point. And I was same thing going through last I don't know 100 tweets or retweets, and she's just a total neocon. She's a neocon, right? She's this darling of the left, former honorary head of the Council of Canadians, this sort of important player for decades and viewed so positively. And to read her Twitter and is she quotes David Frum, she quotes Andrew Coyne, she quotes this one person saying retweets this person saying Trump is Musk's client, Musk is Putin's client, Putin is Xi's client. So Donald Trump is Elon Musk's client, who is Putin's client, who is Chinese Xi's client. So Trump is just a puppet of Putin and Xi, I guess. I don't. And she had another one where she retweets. From now on, U.S. allies may need to reconsider sharing intelligence with the U.S. With Tulsi Gabbard in charge, sharing intel is like sending it directly to the Kremlin. Canada is part of the Five Eyes, and I don't want us sharing any intelligence with the states if these are the sorts of people we'll be sharing it with. Hell, kick them out of the Five Eyes altogether if it comes to this. Okay, this is like so many elements of insanity in that tweet. The first thing is the Five Eyes without the US doesn't exist. Okay. let's like understand what the Five Eyes is, and the NSA is far and away the principal part of this. So that's crazy. The idea that Tulsi Gabbard is just like going to be now everything, all U.S. intelligence is going to be passed on directly, to Putin's email account. Like this is just unbelievable stuff. Okay, another one is as of now, another retweet of Maude Barlow. As of now, NATO is effectively over. Why would any of our allies share intelligence with us when the head of national intelligence is effectively in bed with Putin? Again, so Five Eyes appointing Gabbard to that position means the Five Eyes is done and NATO is done. Hallelujah! I mean, hallelujah! Maude Barlow, like, are you? This is a negative? Like, what the heck is going on here? This is the left, and I think to kind of like the element that I haven't fully wrapped my head around this and explaining this, but okay, we are in a situation where Donald Trump tweets out something that states that there's going to be these tariffs if Canada doesn't do a couple of things that don't really make that much sense. Okay, and there's just a total panic among the political, economic, whatever. Very embarrassing panic. Trudeau looks kind of like decent in all this compared to some of the provincial premiers and stuff like that, and the Conservatives, like Poilievre's response is to talk about being Canada first and then basically say, oh, we'll do whatever Trump wants. I mean, it's just like so like egregiously embarrassing kind of stuff. So this is like, from a economic nationalist, and this is what Maude Barlow comes. That's where the council comes out of, right? Is fighting the first free trade agreement, and the idea is that if we sign this free trade agreement with the U.S. back in the late '80s, we are going to become so dependent economically on the U.S. that we're going to just have to follow them in, like all international affairs and this and that. That was like a big part. That's why it's called the Council Canadian. It's very nationalistic, right? And so this Donald Trump stuff and seeing the kind of embarrassment of the political and economic elite in response to this tariff threat, you would think this would be kind of like the moment of a lot of these sort of economic nationalists to be like, hey, we were right. Like, this is, we're proving, yeah, it's taking, took a while, whatever. Not that it necessarily took a while to debate some of those questions, but like this should be a time. But instead of that, Maude Barlow is basically complaining that Donald Trump is not operating the US empire as the more like sensible neocons would operate the US empire. Like that's and I just think that like, it's just like a kind of a bit of a fascinating dynamic. Like she's so bought in on the NATO proxy war, and she's really crazy on Ukraine, really crazy. She's bad on Palestine, doesn't touch the issue much, and has done some bad stuff. And she's clearly on board with the China stuff. She's really crazy on Ukraine. And anyways, I don't exactly know the kind of like macro point in all of this, but it's fascinating to see. Basically, they uphold she specifically, but I think it goes into some broader layers. They buy into the U.S. empire's geopolitical framework, and so the Canada being further economically dependent on Washington and having to follow that geopolitical framework, that's not a problem because they believe in it, they see it, they want it. So, the sort of economic nationalist arguments that they were making at one point as that forcing us down that path, you wouldn't make those arguments because you want to go down that path. That's the right way to be, is kind of, anyway. So it's pretty remarkable to see the politics of some of these individuals. I think I'll just leave it at that, and I'll make Laura a co-host. And if people have any comments, questions, whatever, we got a bit of time here, so go ahead.
So Eva, I just wanted to ask you, I don't see any hands up yet. So Elizabeth had said something about something happened with Singh this week, the head of the NDP, Jamit Singh. Do you know what it was? She wanted to know if you were going to talk about it, something crazy with him.
No, I didn't see it.
Oh, really? Let me see if I can find her message. Maybe Elizabeth could put her hand up. And but the fiasco on Jamit Singh that came out today. Oh, maybe. Yeah, okay. So there's Elizabeth now. Let's get her. Okay.
Go ahead.
You can unmute Elizabeth. Go ahead. Elizabeth. Elizabeth, can you unmute Elizabeth? I keep trying to.
I am.
Oh shoot, I'm sorry. One of us just muted you again, I think. Okay, go ahead, unmute Elizabeth.
Okay. All right. Okay. And I'm going to try and remember because I can't find the stupid things. Things just disappear. And I shared it. And it was something about he was being interviewed by CPC. And then the interviewer said something like, how do you have to have such a luxurious lifestyle? And so he was telling how he made this money. And apparently he's been put under house arrest. There's a whole bunch of actions immediately because he gave out sensitive information, something or whatever. And it's just like something out of, like, my father had schizophrenia, so you can imagine it's nutty like that. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Eve. The same, it's nutty. Everything is nutty right now. It makes no sense. And so I was thinking, where did this come from? When I think of the corruption in the Liberal Conservative Party that they do blatantly, especially Stephen Harper, he's got to be the worst. And nobody gives a shit. And then he goes and tells about how he made this money and it was sensitive material and shouldn't have been shared on the thing. And like, and it was CBC interview. So I went looking for it, but darned, I can't find it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't
But
know. I don't know anything about.
this just came into my Gmail tonight. So I thought, what the heck? And like when you're talking about Maude Barlow and you're talking about all these straight-laced people that sort of led the country on how to be a Canadian and all this stuff, I mean, what are they drinking? Like, it is really scary because there's nothing, it's like, I don't know, I can't.
Well,
It
I
makes
think that with regards to Maude Barlow, the reality is that when it comes to geopolitical affairs, it, almost all of the I don't know, political world from left to they basically are in agreement with the U.S. empire's perspective. There's rare occasions, like the Palestine issue is one where fairly decent swaths of kind of political opinion are challenging the but from China to Ukraine to Haiti to Venezuela to Syria to that the it's to follow what basically the Washington instigated line is. Maybe a little disagreements here and there, but that's the overarching kind of dynamic. But
Okay, go ahead, Corinne.
The Council of Canadian does have a no to NATO policy. They have not made it a campaign. I was the one that promoted the no to NATO policy, but I did have difficulty trying to get a campaign. And someone did say that Maude Barlow has never been very agreeable about that. But it is officially their policy.
yeah, no, I mean that makes sense that it wouldn't there wouldn't be much pickup um where to the extent that she has influence. I don't know how much influence she still has. Obviously at some point she had lots of influence. Um but yeah, it's
Okay, Yuri. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's
Okay, Yuri.
Hey, Ben, great to be back on. And I've noticed, Eve, on social media when I go on Instagram sometimes, Black Lives Matter Canada has been speaking out more on imperialism. They've been reposting lots of Palestine solidarity events and Sudan solidarity events, and so I'm curious your response on that. Are we hopefully going to see Black Lives Matter Canada do more of that and hopefully have the perspective you share, which is Canada is no good to Black people overseas and never has been. And also about Romeo Dallaire, as somebody who does have a Congolese mother, I do have to bitch a little bit about this. I'm still shocked at how people are still propping up Romeo Dallaire as this white savior of Rwandans and other Africans and so forth. When you posted how, when you posted on your Instagram, which I commented on along with Pitts of Truth to the Powerless, were you shocked at how many people were still recycling the garbage propaganda about Dallaire was trying to save Rwandans? And when I kept responding to people about how he either stays silent on what Paul Kagame does to Congolese people and the fact that he supported the coup against Aristide, the fact that Mr. Genocide expert doesn't think that murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada is not part of Canadian genocide. So are you still quite shocked at how how persistent that propaganda won't die. And then the last thing I wanted to complain about is recently people are cheering for the people once again are cheering for the attempted overthrow of the Ba'ath Party in Syria, and lots of people who are somewhat good on Palestine, like Mehdi Hassan, Owen Jones of the Guardian, who actually always sucked on Palestine, but only started to become good on the issue October when the genocide took place, are now again using their platforms to say we need to overthrow Assad, all this nonsense both sides is. And the Middle East Eye and other Qatari funded publications have also been doing this. And yeah, I'm just shocked about it. And I think my only 2 cents to those folks is please just stay in your lane. If you're good on Palestine, just stay in your lane, but please leave Syria alone and don't make Syria into another Libya and Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I basically agree with you in that I think that the 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 demonization of Assad is and the justification of intervention, it's the demonization I don't is okay so long as it's not all about justifying a massive US led uh horrendous sectarian war that clearly that's whether they debate the the level of popular support for opposing Assad 13 years ago, and you can debate that, but the it became we're backing all kinds of really horrible forces pursuing a regime change effort that's been exceedingly devastating. That I don't know how you can't see that as the overarching story, whatever you think of Assad, one way or another. But yeah, so that's troubling, and it's fascinating to watch, like Al Jazeera, right? Like Al Jazeera on this stuff is like they are obviously very compared to Canadian media, incredibly good on Gaza. And
Yeah.
they're slow on Lebanon. It's interesting, like because they're anti-Hezbollah, right? They were, but then because Hezbollah was kind of like providing some resistance to the genocide in Gaza, you can sort of see that shift. And then, as last couple months when Israel really like, picked up its violence, I would say they, are pretty good at, defending Lebanon from Israeli assault, but still kind of have this like clearly like hostile to Hezbollah. But then you start seeing their coverage on Syria. It's just like, it's just like they're just praising like anti-Assad, like basically just praising Al Qaeda. They're not. It's pretty fascinating to see some of those kind of dynamics. But now, with regards to Black Lives Matter, I haven't seen that, but that's good. I think particularly, obviously, in the Black Lives Matter Canada, it's Haiti. Haiti should be a really important issue, and I don't see Canada out of the core group should be an obvious anti-racist position. And then with regards to Romeo Dallaire, I mean that's part of how I brought it up. I felt bad. I was happy with getting him to say I oppose the genocide. If you look at it, it's like more than 250,000 people have already seen that. Samira, her video of it got really the former CBC journalist in Toronto. It got really wide circulation in how she framed it, but she framed it from this like this pro Dallaire. I didn't do that, of course, right? I didn't frame it as from a pro Dallaire standpoint because that's not my, I don't like Dallaire, and I've written lots about what Dallaire has supported. He's supported most of Canadian imperial policies, and but it kind of brings up some interesting dynamics of how you engage in the conversation about Canadian foreign policy. It's like you need to, at one level, you need to uphold mythology to challenge official policy, right? I was very careful in this press release that was put out today, not to directly uphold Dallaire mythology, but implicitly you still are, and I don't really know like the exact answer to that, because obviously Romeo Dallaire has standing in Canadian officialdom, because first of all he was a Canadian general. He was a general, and his dad was a general. I believe his grandfather was. He comes from this like history, long history of like Canadian military men. Um, but and then obviously what he did with Rwanda, and he actually played a role in enabling U.S. policy and then justifying Kagame, and then go on and on and on. So it is a fascinating kind of dynamic of using the standing of an individual to quote them, or to use to reinforce a horrible thing, to mention genocide, a horrible thing going on today, use his standing, but then try not to reinforce the mythology. And as you pointed out, whole bunch of people on my Twitter and then other Twitters were like, "Oh, I love that guy. He's the greatest. He's a real Canadian." All this kind of business that I don't believe at all, and I feel bad that by getting him to say that there's a genocide in Gaza, there's an outpouring of this. Anyways, it's an interesting kind of it's the first point is to be conscious of these things, and then try to figure out ways of what forum you can make insert something and have a potentially at least a positive impact, i.e. the genocide in Gaza, but then not have a negative impact on another horrible situation. But yeah, anyways, that's
Laurel, go ahead. Laurel Thompson, are you there? I don't know. You're unmuted, so I'm not sure. Okay, we'll go ahead with Elizabeth and then come back to you, Laura. For some reason, maybe you've stepped away. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, I just need something really clarified. Like, I read his books, and it was similar to, it went in depth. He had severe PTSD. And of course, all the military things before, I wasn't aware he did any of that. He talks about it in his books, all those things. But what you are talking about, I have never seen or heard anything of it. This was the first time, and I just was so shocked. And the reason I'm shocked, like all the other people that think he's so great, is because Canada was, and the Ghanaians, who didn't bring hardly any weapons, they were the only ones that stayed in Rwanda. So that's where this mythology comes from, if it is mythology, like you're saying. Yeah. So the fact that he was there, I mean, how much damage could he really do, since he was the only one there and they were running out of everything? So I know this is something I would like. What I want from you, Eve, is I want some sources, because I have been proven time and time again, I've been wrong about so many things, but this thing I did, because Rwanda really meant a lot to me. And I was so, it was kind of like, it's the same as Palestine. Everybody abandoned them. And it's the same as like in South Africa, the same thing as has happened with the Rohingya people. This is nothing.
The first thing, the couple things. The first thing I'll say is that think about another genocide where those genocided end up in power. Did that ever happen before? I don't think it has. The RPF, the basic story is this. The RPF, Kagame in 59 to 61, the Tutsi monarchy, which had dominated, are driven out as part of a decolonization process. They mostly go to Uganda. And so the distinction between Tutsi and Hutu is basically wealth owners, closeness to the monarchy, and cattle. They have cattle. That's the wealth and dominance of over the military. And the Hutu are basically 90%, and they're the laborers. And so it's a caste divide. They all speak the same language. They same general customs. Um, and so the Kagame, whose family was like aristocracy, they are and thousands of other Tutsis that have been driven out to Uganda. They basically organized an invasion. When they Kagame is part of the Museveni's forces that win power in Kampala in Uganda in '86, and he's like a top intelligence official in the Ugandan military. And in 1990, they invade Rwanda. So the exiled Tutsi invade Rwanda, where Uganda, of course, is a much bigger country than Rwanda. And the official story is that 4,000 Rwandans desert the Ugandan military to invade Rwanda. Now, in fact, it's basically Ugandan invasion with this exiled Tutsi Rwandans, invading. And there's a war, and you can debate, you can have a discussion about like should like people who, even if are part of the aristocracy or part of the monarchy or whatever, like should you be expelled from your country? That's interesting. Like there's moral questions to be had there. But I think the historic analogy would partly be the Bay of Pigs, right? And the people who were driven out by Castro with the revolution, and them with the U.S. reinvading Cuba. That would be somewhat of a historic analogy to think about when trying to make sense of this. And they displace in the war. They displace like more than 10% of Rwanda, and basically Washington, London, and Ottawa back Kampala, back the RPF, and Paris is backing the Habyarimana government. It's kind of in its sphere. And after the Cold War, the Americans are kind of pushing more into some elements of the French sphere. It wasn't a former French colony; it was a Belgian colony. But the Paris has quite a bit of sway in Rwanda and Burundi, and so the Kagame's forces shoot down the plane that then starts the mass slaughter of the spring of '94. That's pretty much like, I don't know, there's really an argument against that. The Globe and Mail's had on the front page that it was the RPGs fired by Ugandan RPGs that were fired to knock the plane down. And there's tons of other evidence before the Globe and Mail's confirmation of that in recent years. And so now the biggest piece of propaganda in the history of Canadian foreign policy that I've come across is a book called Le Patron de Dallaire Parle. So the boss of Dallaire speaks, and it's written by Jacques Roger Boubou. Jacques Roger Boubou was the former foreign minister of Cameroon. And Dallaire was the head of the military part of the UN mission. He wasn't the head of the whole UN mission. It was the former Cameroonian, or not former, he was a Cameroonian, former Cameroon foreign minister, who was in charge of the whole UN mission at the political level. And like, unlike Dallaire, who before he went to Rwanda stated that he didn't know where Rwanda was on a map, Jacques Roger Boubou actually knew a little bit about Rwanda and African politics and whatnot. And he published his entire book basically saying that Dallaire supported the RPF. I mean, among a series of other things, but that's a central part of his book, that Dallaire broke the neutrality principle and assisted Paul Kagame's forces, including in enabling the shooting down of Habyarimana's plane. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But this is a former foreign minister of Cameroon who was the head of the UN mission detailing all of this. And the Canadian media, while they've talked about Dallaire's book I did an actual survey in my propaganda system book. I went and got the exact numbers in the Canadian newsstand search of like how many times Dallaire's book had been mentioned versus how many times Jacques Roger Boubout's book has been mentioned, and it's like thousands of times for Dallaire's book, and Jacques Roger Boubout's book is mentioned. I believe it was 5 times, but only one of those was what you would call like somewhat of a like a sort of an engagement, real engagement with the book. I think a couple were letters. One was an attack, just this total like over the top attack. But one was like basically a straight kind of summary of the book. So now since that time we can debate, whether this was true or not. Maybe this is lies. Maybe you can debate, and this is detailed in Robin Philpott's books. They've gotten a lot of stuff about Dallaire and all of the sort of politics of 93, 94. But leaving that aside, just taking stuff that's much more easily confirmed, which is that on Friday night at the Salon du Livre de Montréal, in front of me, Romeo Dallaire was asked about the M23 role in the Congo. And he completely justified Paul Kagame's role in the Congo. Well, Paul Kagame's role in the Congo, as horrible as what happened in Rwanda was, and it definitely was really horrible, everyone agrees that millions of people, many times more than the highest estimate of Rwanda, have been killed in the east of the Congo due to basically 30 years of Rwandan incursions, proxies, different invasions, whole series of different things, including marching all the way to Kinshasa, overthrowing a government, and then when that government turned on you, marching, trying to march back again, eliciting an 8-country war. Paul Kagame has done all that. That is not up for discussion. That is an absolute, unequivocal, overwhelmingly documented facts. You can quibble around the edges of this or that. There is absolutely no doubt that Paul Kagame has caused mayhem in the Congo. And in 2024, on November 29th, 2024, Romeo Dallaire is still unequivocally justifying all that while he has a whole relationship with Kagame. The Dallaire Institute is based in Kigali, and while they're fighting against that's one of the things I was going to ask Dallaire. They're fighting against the Dallaire Institute is supposed to be about child soldiers. Well, as the Globe Mail reported on the front page about a year and a half ago or something like that, the global affairs bureaucrats are all concerned about how, like, we're funding this project, the Dallaire Institute project in Kigali against child soldiers, while there's all this evidence of child soldiers being used by Rwanda in the Congo. And they were basically, this is embarrassing. And it appears the Trudeau government, at the ministerial level, supersedes global affairs concerned with this, like, really bad optics. I presume partly because of Trudeau's ties with Romeo Dallaire. I don't know that for sure. That's speculation. There's probably some U.S. geopolitics, maybe some other geopolitics that go into it. So there is no scenario where Romeo Dallaire should be perceived positively in the Great Lakes region. You can, even if you want to pretend or you want to just sort of deny I think pretty well documented, but debate that about his actual role in contributing to the mass killing of 94 in Rwanda. If you look at the 30 years after that, or at least the last 25 years, I mean, he is a bad guy. There's no getting around that Romeo Dallaire is a bad guy in enabling Kagame's absolute horrors. So there's a lot to be said about this. This get into all kinds of details and understanding what exactly happened in Rwanda in 94 and what happened in Burundi, some geopolitics, this was a pre-planned genocide, or was this kind of, I don't know if not to basically popular genocide, if you want to call it that, in a sense. and with all kinds of contexts around it, and then how much role did the RPF play in all kinds of killings that are then attributed to the Hutu militias. There's all kinds of layers to this that some of it, which I'd say are we can say with high levels of confidence, and some of it much more kind of murky. But there is no scenario where if you're in 2024, you are justifying Paul Kagame's role in the Congo. You're a bad guy in this. That's I think pretty straightforward.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions, Eve. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry that was a bit long, but yeah. Take care, everyone.